Nihilism and non-duality have a lot in common, but there are also a lot of things that are very, very different. The experience in your everyday life is very, very different if you're coming from nihilism or if you're coming from non-duality. And I would like to talk about it because so many people that I see in our community and in the comment section are experiencing nihilism, and where it might feel like you're talking about non-duality, but the tone that is in the words, the way, the outlook of life, the what sounds like the internal feeling, is very clearly not non-duality. It's not the practical non-duality that we work with in Fetters. It's more that negative, ruminating nihilism that we can experience. And it's normal for us to experience nihilism. I had a long period in my teens where I was immensely nihilistic, because as an autist, I wasn't aware that I was an autist back then. Um, it Anything about religion and anything that was any type of dogma just didn't make any sense. I was a Buddhist and I was reading the Buddhist suttas and I was meditating, but I had that feeling of um, pointlessness of life and meaninglessness to life that I now, in retrospect, can see wasn't meaninglessness because I gave it a lot of meaning. And I think that is the key difference between nihilism and non-duality, that when you really truly become aware that there is no separate self, there is no meaning anymore. There is nothing that holds any inherent meaning, which means that you can't feel any negative feelings. It's not negative anymore because you become aware that the thought that you have is in and of its own empty of any inherent existence. It's just a thought, or it's just a feeling arising in the body without a thought attached to it, which means that it can't be negative. Rumination ceases when you really truly understand non-duality, when you really truly understand that the identification that you place on everything is where the suffering is. And in nihilism, in my experience and what I hear from what I see in our community, and when I see YouTube teachers talk about nihilism and scientists talk about nihilism, what I hear is a lot of suffering because there's so much identification with the meaninglessness of everything. There's so much suffering in the realization that there's no free will, as if you ever had. And that is what I would like to talk about today. So, what nihilism and non duality have in common is that both are aware that there's no free will, there's no free choice, there's no inherent meaning with anything. The difference is that in non duality and in the Fetter works, and when we work with the Buddhist Fetters, we're also aware that there's no separate self. And that insight is what is making the entire difference, what is creating the entire experience different, because there's no belief left. And I know that if you're a nihilist and if you experience nihilism in your life, you might say that, but I don't have any belief in anything. But if you have a feeling of negativity or positivity, there's an underlying belief behind it. When we work with the Fetters, we come to become aware and we deconstruct so much of our underlying beliefs that you are literally in an open space without any beliefs left. There is nothing that is pulling you in a certain direction and telling you that this is how truth is. You have an adaptability and a readiness to adapting that is there all the time. You're not married into any underlying belief that things have to be in a certain way. You're completely open to being completely wrong. And you're open to that in every single moment. But I'm stepping ahead of myself. I would like to take this. I have made notes and I would like to refer to my notes. So I'm sure that I'm going to say everything. Normally, when I make my videos. I'm just sitting and speaking out from that open space where whatever is arising is what I'm talking about and what I'm teaching in my lessons. This one is going to be a little bit different because I have a lot of notes. I have a lot of things I would like to say, and I want to make sure that everything is being said in the right way. And if you have any experiences or comments about it, I would love to hear about it. I would love to hear other experiences in these fields. So kindly write in the comment section. Now, as I said, as an autist, I experienced nihilism with that depressive existential collapse, that there was like a very clear understanding that there is no meaning with anything. And it was where I now think that I read Buddhism and read the suttas and understood the sutras too early in my life. I think it would now, in retrospect, I think it would have been better if I had waited until I was in my 20s and not had read it that early that I did, because there was a lot of things that I read that I didn't have the concepts or the psychological or emotional maturity to place it into. It's also why when I was raising my own children, I did not talk to them about this type of Buddhism that is with anatta, that is completely dissolving all of it, because I wanted them to have that idea of good and bad, of evil and justice, and the fairy tale belief that a child needs to have when we're growing up. You need to have a strong ego. You need to have strong boundaries. Otherwise, you can't dissolve him. And it's also why I'm spending so much time in the Awakening curriculum, really teaching you how to build up your boundaries so you can look through the delusion that it actually is, but it needs to be in place before you do anything else. So if I should say it as short as possible, the difference between nihilism and non-duality and the Buddhist anatta is that one still believe and maintain a self that is experiencing. So there is a me here experiencing the dread, experiencing the void. My life is meaningless. I am meaningless. There's no point in me getting up in the morning, and you have to work with philosophical nihilism to get all the tools so you can kind of soothe that neurotic idea that you suddenly have no point here. You maintain the idea that you are here, and you maintain the idea that there still is a separate self. It's pointless. All of it is pointless. And that is what I mean when I say that there's like that negative valence to it, because it suddenly comes with a lot of suffering. And as you when we work in the second fetter, where we work about doubt and our underlying beliefs and our connection with feelings and emotions, as you know that it is really important to become aware of all your shadow sides. It's really important to feel into your body, notice what it is that what is your feelings and what is your emotions about a certain thing, but do not believe in them in any way. It's practice where you allow it to arise, to come to the surface, and you allow to experience, you allow the body to experience and express, but there's no belief in it as a truth. It's just an experiencing in the moment. So if I should say very short what the difference between nihilism and Buddhist non-duality is, then it is that one still maintains a separate self experiencing, and the other does not differentiate between the experience and the experiencer. The way that we see it in non-duality and with anatta is that there is not a separate individual experiencer here that is experiencing. What we're pointing to is that the experiencer is an experience. They're not separate. They're not two different things. That the causes and conditions here that is creating this meat suit here, that is experiencing things, that is the experience. It's like when we talk about thoughts and we say that the thoughts that you can have where you can have, thoughts coming up, and then you can have other thoughts that are debating those thoughts, and you have like that feeling of two different opinions that are playing themselves out, basically rumination on on every single level in life, where you can ping pong with your thoughts like that. Your thoughts are ping ponging. What we're pointing to is that both of them are thoughts. They're not two different individuals in you that are sitting and having a conversation with one another. It is the same thing. The thoughts are the same. No matter what opinion it is that is surfacing, the thoughts are the same. But not only that, the thinker is a thought too. There is not a separate entity anywhere that is thinking. Thinking is a thought. That process of thinking, of thoughts arising, is a thought. It is arising in the same space. And we know that now from fMRIs that are made, that we can see the part in the brain where the ego, where the selfing is happening. We can see that part of the brain. And the more that you notice and you ruminate and you try to express or find a meaningful life, or try to find the separate self anywhere, the more you are activating the default mode network, which is part of selfing. That is the ego. That is the center of the ego. It is processes in the brain that is felt as if there is a separate self. There's not, though. There's causes and conditions. There's socialization. There is a full creation of this neuroendopsychosocial being that is not a separate entity anywhere. There is a constant arising in this moment that can be experienced without any attachment to it. That can be experienced without any separate self or I in the middle that is experiencing. So where one path, nihilism, leads you further into suffering because you are here experiencing all of it, and it's suffering and it's meaningless, it's pointless. There's no point for you to get up in the morning. It's one of those things that I think Britt Hartley from No-Nonsense Spirituality, if you do not know her, I can warmly recommend you to watch her videos about nihilism. I absolutely love that woman. She is wonderful, the way that she expresses and talks. She's very, very autistic, and I absolutely love that. But she talks about that it's that feeling. She's a nihilist, and she talks about that feeling of waking up in the morning. She had a period in her life where she was waking up in the morning, just wanting to kill herself, but decided to have a cup of coffee first. And she had to create meaning in her life, seeing that there might not be meaning to her life, but her being in the world created meaning for her children. That's why she stayed. And that whole suffering that is happening with that is not happening when you become aware of the arising in this moment. And that is where the difference is between nihilism and non-duality, Buddhist non-duality. I just want to say as well, when I say non-duality, I mean Buddhist non-duality. There's a huge difference between Advaita non-duality, which is believing in a God. It's not saying God, it's talking about the universe as being one consciousness, and believe that consciousness is constant. That is like the foundation for everything, but that is a belief. You do not know that. In your direct experience, you have no knowledge of that. That is a thought that is creating, which means it's only a belief. What we're doing in Buddhist non-duality when we work with anatta is that we're dissolving all beliefs. There is no beliefs. There's nowhere to land. There's nowhere to stand. There is nowhere, anywhere that you can lean on. And that's why that you often hear Todd and I talk about that it's so important for you to, and it's completely fine and okay, to have beliefs that you lean on. Because when we work with anatta, with the practical non-duality or the Buddhist non-duality, we dissolve anything. There's nothing to lean on, and that can feel scary until you really truly understand what that means, that there is nothing negative nor positive in that. It is without any opinion, any assumption, any judgment. It is just that pure arising that is happening in this moment. And there's no opinion about that, whether it's good or bad. It's just experienced as that pure arising as it is. There's not an experiencer here either to experience it, because the experience is arising in this meat suit. There are 9 billion different ways of experiencing reality. None of us can say which one is the real reality or the real truth, because that doesn't exist. There are different ways of experiencing based on your causes and conditions. And that is all you have. There's nothing left to lean on. And that is the main difference between Buddhist non-duality and Advaita non-duality. So when we talk about the Buddhist non-duality and we talk about the fetters, the 10 fetters that we work with, whether you're leaning on Advaita, you can absolutely work with the 10 fetters, but only up to the 8th fetter. It's from the 8th fetter that we start to dissolve all beliefs, and instead exist in that open space where there's just an arising happening and a flow moving with that arising, and no preferences or opinions about that arising. So where nihilism can potentially lead you into that void and create a lot of suffering because there's a maintaining of the separate self, non-duality, Buddhist non-duality is leading you out of it because there is no truth to be held anywhere. So let me start from the beginning. The thing that is the common denominator for both nihilism and Buddhist non-duality, anatta non-duality, is that both of us agree on facts that are completely dismantling the common illusions and delusions that we have in life. Both reject that there is an inherent meaning with anything. Both of us mean that everything is in its nature inherently empty. That whatever meaning anything holds, this plant holds, me, my microphone, anything holds, no matter what meaning that holds, is something I have just placed on it. There is not any inherent meaning in anything, which means that there's no truth. And neuroscience is also confirming this. Robert Sapolsky is one of my main guys that talks about that the idea of a self is just a constructed narrative. There is not a separate self anywhere. We also know it from the split brain studies that are so interesting. I can warmly recommend you to Google that and watch the videos and see more about it. It's so interesting. Because if you split the brain at the corpus callosum, you have a right hemisphere and a left hemisphere. And those two are no longer talking with one another, which means that you basically have 2 different personalities. Again, back to Britt Hartley, she has an amazing video that I really like where she talks about why she can't believe in a soul. And that is, she's pointing out brilliantly that when you can split down the brain in the middle and you have a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere, you have 2 different personalities. Does that mean that you have 2 souls? One wants to become an accountant, the other one wants to be a race driver. Does that mean that there then are 2 souls? And it's that understanding that you can give information to one eye with a person that has the split brain and give them an information about get up and get a glass of apple juice. And the person will get up and get a glass of apple juice, but because there's no connection between the 2 halves of the brain, the person doesn't know why they're getting up and getting a glass of juice, because that information is not given to the other part. So what the person will do is just make up shit. Just come up with an idea, why did you get up and get a glass of juice? Well, I felt like apple juice, I like apples, and create a little story about it. So we know that the brain is creating that idea of an interacting, and we know that you can absolutely cut that at the core by, for example, doing a split brain. And that part of the brain being a meaning-making machine is another thing that is creating so much suffering in our lives if we're leaning on nihilism. Because if you still believe that there is a separate self here, you're trying to create meaning, and your brain will create meaning. It's one of the things that we're working a lot with in the deconstruction of the underlying beliefs when we work with anatta, with practical non-duality in the Fetter works, that really becoming aware of one thing is what is arising in this moment. Another thing is what your thoughts are telling you is arising in this moment. And all the thoughts are starting to weave themselves together into creating meaning that is not really there. That is because the brain is a meaning-making machine. It wants things to make sense, even though they don't. So we're creating a story that gives us a feeling about things making sense, even when they don't. And we also know from neuroscience now that the default mode network in the brain is where the selfing is. We know that, for example, and it's also why Todd and I, when we work with people that are, doing meditation or doing inquiry or trying to notice what is arising in this moment, that the more they chase that, the more ego they are, the more selfing they are, because the default mode network is active. It's also active when we, for example, have anxiety, when we have depression, when we have rumination. That part of the brain is hyperactive. So the only way to snap out of that is to make contact with the body. Literally, right now, feel your feet on the floor. Do not have an opinion about your feet. Do not have an idea of where your feet are in space. Just notice your feet on the floor. When you go from that self-ruminating, self-identifying idea of reality into your body and noticing where your body is in space, then you snap out of that part of the brain, and that is where you start to have a fair game, where it's suddenly possible for you to notice what actually is arising in this moment and not what you think is arising in this moment, and where you don't have an opinion or wish for something having to rise in this moment in a certain way. Reality is allowed to present itself as it is presenting itself. There's no opinion or wish for it to be any different, because who are you to know? It's you are the one perceiving it through your senses, the 5 external senses and the 5 internal senses. I can make another video talking about those. And in that, a creation of a perception of a reality is created. That is made in that. That doesn't mean that any of that is real. It just means that you just created that. So the more you are in your body and noticing how your body is feeling, I don't mean feelings and emotions, I mean literally somatically feeling your body. Feel a tension in your shoulders, feel a contraction in your pelvic or your abdominals. Notice your feet on the floor. Feel that tension the floor has on the skin on your feet, and notice your body like that without any thoughts about it, but just that somatic experience of the body is snapping you out of the default mode network and the rumination and the depression and the anxiety and the neuroticism and all of that. So far in the basic things I've talked about, nihilism and non-duality, Buddhist non-duality is very similar. But the main difference between nihilism and non-duality, Buddhist non-duality, is location. So the facts are the same, but the frame of it is different. So if I talk about nihilism first, nihilism is often a concept that is created as a placeholder for something that has been lost. It's often people that are losing their religion, that is suddenly seeing through the delusion that religion is. It can also be someone that is coming of age and suddenly seeing that the way they were taught that life is, reality is, men are, women are, it doesn't fit with the way they can feel in them life actually is. So whatever your foundation is, whatever belief you have is falling. And then nihilism often becomes a placeholder for that. So it's just a new concept where the maintaining of a me here is the same. It's just the circumstances around the me that is different. So nihilism is a concept that is being created as a placeholder for a previous concept. Non-duality and Buddhist non-duality is a direct experience. There is not a concept attached to it that needs to go. So in nihilism, you see yourself as the separate self. You see yourself here. looking at a meaningless and indifferent universe out there. So the self, the experience here, and the void that is out there are two different things. And when you realize that there is no free will, that there is just an open void, that there's no meaning with anything, when you maintain the separate self here, that is viewing all that and experiencing all that, there's a lot of suffering in that, because you still have wishes for things to be different than they are. There's not a complete understanding of what that meaningless actually mean. There is a lot of meaning created in it, a lot of, like we talk about in the seventh fetter, a lot of something out of nothing is created. And it has to, because you're maintaining the separate self. You're maintaining the main delusion of all of it, that there is someone here, which just gives the thoughts about, I am meaningless. I am a separate self here, trapped in a meaningless life, in a meaningless universe that is all gonna end at some point. I will die. Everybody I love will die. And that will just be the end of it. And it's actually pointless if I'm here or if I'm not here, because it's meaningless. So there is like a feeling of a problem out there, and you are kind of victim in that. And because of that, which basically just means that the meaninglessness suddenly have been giving a lot of meaning. A lot of something out of nothing was just created, but it had to be created in order to maintain the separate self here. And that gives that depressive collapse that a lot of people experience with nihilism, gives that existential anxiety, that there is nowhere to land and no one to catch you. There is a huge feeling of isolation, and there is very often suicidal ideations. And this is where one of the reasons I really want to open up for this and talk about this, it's because of the experience that neurodiverse people have with nihilism. Because we rarely fit into any type of dogma or any type of religion. We are very comfortable with meaninglessness, because it's the only thing that makes sense, that there's no meaning with it. But we also have a tendency to being introvert, and we have a tendency to rumination, and we have a tendency to neuroticism, that the rumination very quickly becomes a truth. And I think it was Costa and McCrae made a study that shown it was actually the opposite that was proved, that if you're an extrovert, you're more likely to not ruminate, and you're more likely to be happy in life, which for the rest of us means that we're introverts. We have a tendency to neuroticism. We have a tendency to rumination. We are basically fucked because we're digging our own hole all the time. But that is basically how it feels to be neurodiverse. And it's one of the reasons why I really want to talk about this, because when you have a negative outlook on life, you just created something out of nothing. You are focusing on something that is not there. Meaninglessness means there is no meaning. That cannot be a negative thing. It cannot be a positive thing either. It just is. You are creating the meaning of it being meaningless. And if you're neurodivergent, I know that, and I really hope that this is speaking deeply to you. So the next time you're starting with your rumination and starting with your neuroticism, that you remember that whatever you think right now is just a fucking thought. It's not real. It's not what actually is arising. In this moment, you can notice what is arising by making contact with your body, but I will get to that. All this just to say that as a neurodivergent, you can get catastrophically stuck here, because it is a downward spiral, and you believe that downward spiral to be true. You just gave that downward spiral meaning. Meaninglessness means it doesn't have any meaning. Now, where Buddhist non-duality and the Fetter work that we work with, where that differs is that where nihilism is a placeholder and it's a concept that is a placeholder for something that was lost. Religion, coming of age, and something like that. Nihilism becomes a new concept, where in non-duality, we don't want you to have any concepts. We want you to have your own direct experience, which means that you're noticing what is arising in this moment, not what you think is arising. And this is important. There's a difference between what you think is arising and what actually is arising. And that is where the suffering ends. Because, for example, you can have right now a feeling that I am here behind my eyes. You might have a feeling that I, as a separate self, I'm sitting behind my eyes. I'm sitting in here somewhere in my face, and I'm sitting on a chair and my feet are down there, and I can look up into the sky. And all of those ideas are thoughts. Because in your direct experience, in actuality, I just have to say that you're not looking up at the sky, you're looking out into the universe, right? You're on a hurling ball through space. You cannot say there's any up and down anywhere. So it's based on how it is experienced here. But that experience is not true. There is a direct experience that is a pure arising without a thought attached to it. Which means that, for example, when we talk about your feet, you have an idea that your feet are down there somewhere. If you close your eyes, how do you know? In your direct experience, how do you know where your feet actually are? And I don't mean adding a thought to it, because you need to add a thought to tell me where they are. In your direct experience, that is just an arising of a buzzing sensation somewhere in a direction where you normally think your feet are. That is the direct experience. That is that purity without any opinion about anything. That is just arising. It is a dissolving of all identity with anything. And there are 10 different ways we can identify, and that is what we call Fetters. And you have the Fetter work where we are dissolving the 10 different ways that you can identify. So with non-duality, you're shifting from a concept into a direct experience. And like I said, the Fetters come from Buddhism, and the Buddha was very adamant to really emphasizing all the time that there is nothing that he said or I say that is true. You cannot take anything that I'm presenting to you as a truth. You cannot create a new concept about that. You need to experience for yourself what this actually means, which means that there is not one thing that is truth, because there can't be. You need to find out what non-duality means for you, how that is experienced for you. You can use different exercises and inquiries, and there's the full curriculum with all the lessons that you can do, so you get an idea of how this is experienced for you. You have to try it out for yourself. I'm very much aware that that in and of itself can become another concept. And it's okay to have that. It's okay to create a little concept for yourself so you have a placeholder. You just need to hold it lightly. It's what the sutta with the raft is talking about, that you come down to the shore, there's a raft, you take the raft to the other shore, and then you leave the raft there. You will find that when you do the Fetter work, there are lots of rafts. There are lots of concepts and insights that you take to you as a truth, but you need to hold them lightly, because they have to go. They have to go too. And if you watch any of the inquiry groups that we have, you will see that all that Todd and I were sitting and doing is basically pointing to the opposite of what the person is sitting with. So if you sit and you have a feeling of there's no boundaries, there's no me anywhere, we will point you to the opposite, because we want you into the middle way. We will point you to having strong boundaries and feeling that feeling of separation and become aware of that feeling of separation that happens in every moment. And if you sit and you have that super identified, that you feel the suffering in your life all the time, we're going to point you to the opposite, to the non-self. How do you know that what you feel right now is what you actually feel? Is it a sensation in the body and a thought attached to it? So we want you to dissolve all beliefs. It's okay to have a crutch or have like training wheels on your bike for a while, but you need to let them go. And this is also where Buddhist non-duality is so different from Advaita non-duality, because there you're taught to get a belief, to have a belief and maintain that belief. We want all of it to go, which also means that every single investigation that you do is turned inwards. It's not like with nihilism where there's a meaningless universe and life out there and me here almost being a victim experiencing it. We want you to ask, what is that sensation of a me feeling like a separate self, experiencing the vast universe as empty and void? Where is that differentiation between the two? What is that feeling about with a separate self here looking out to the meaninglessness out there? So the seeker, the one that believes itself to be a separate self, is becoming the point of inquiry, is becoming the subject of inquiry. And what you will find is that that separate self, the thinker that is thinking these thoughts, is the same as the experience. The thinker is a thought too. The experiencer is the experience. There's not a separation of the two. There is no in here and out there. There is just one undivided arising experience. And the experience and the experiencer are not separate, since the experience can only be experienced by the experiencer, which makes the experiencer the experience. It's the causes and conditions in this meat suit that is creating a certain perception about the experience. That means that the experience is subjective to the meat suit that is experiencing in a certain way. And you know that. If I wake you up at 3 a.m. and you haven't had your coffee, if you have your period, if you're menopausal, if somebody just startled you and you have like that rush of adrenaline in your body, your reactions will be different. We know that from that hungry judge study that was made, that a judge would pass a harsher sentence if he was hungry just before his lunch than he would at any other point, for example, in the morning or just after his lunch. And if you asked the judge, he wouldn't know there was a difference. He would feel in him that he passed the correct sentencing, where he didn't. He didn't. And he wasn't even aware. We want you to become aware that you're a hungry judge. So what is the result of the Buddhist non-duality is an immense relief. Because what you do in your dismantling, when you dismantle every single underlying belief, is that immense freedom. There is an arising happening in this moment. If there's no attachment to that arising doesn't have to be in a certain way. It doesn't have to be experienced in a certain way. Doesn't need to be the clever one sitting and saying lots of clever things. You don't need to be, presenting yourself in any way. That is just an arising right now. And in that, there's so much freedom. Because you're setting yourself free, you're setting everybody else free too. They are allowed to be in the world the way that they are. You are allowed to be in the world the way that you are. There is nothing that needs to be any different. And the main reason is that you're no longer holding anything in comparison. Whatever is arising is okay as it is. There's not a wish for anything to be any different than it is right now. And there's a deep, deep understanding that it can't be. So that super exhausting, never-ending defending of the separate self is just gone. It ends. There is no longer any trying to present yourself in a certain way, because you simply do not believe the thoughts anymore. Thoughts are still arising, obviously. Feeling and emotions are still arising, but there's no belief in them. There's more a curiosity towards it. It's more you becoming an anthropologist that are noticing what is arising in this moment. There's no truth in any of it besides what you just placed there. What if you don't place that truth? Then there's just an arising. And anything that is arising cannot be anything but okay. It's okay. And I don't mean positive okay. I don't mean negative okay either. I just mean absolutely neutral okay. And that is where I'm saying that the only feeling you can have is contentment. And I mean neutral contentment. There is not any negative thought in it. There's no positive thought in it either. There's just a pure being, that childish being with the arising that is presenting itself right now. And that means that suffering ends. Because the suffering is only happening because there's an expectation and a wish for this moment to be different. Let's say you have pain in your body, right? You're suffering because you have an idea that this could be different. This moment could be different than it is right now. It obviously can't. It is as it is. So the next level of suffering is because you wish for something to be different than it is, which it can't be. This moment is presenting itself the way that it's presenting itself. You cannot have any opinion about that. You can, but all of your suffering isn't that. And if you look deeper into why you have an opinion about that, why you think that you know what would be better than what is arising right now, you can also see the arrogance in that. And that in its own dissolves a lot of suffering. There's no longer any resistance to what is arising. There's not even resistance to the resistance. There's an absolutely okayness with whatever is arising. So it seems a bit like that the difference is that nihilism is when there's a character in a movie that is suffering, believing in all of that drama. Like said Deadpool, is believing in all of the drama that is happening. That is nihilism, suffering in that. Where when we talk about Buddhist non-duality and we talk about anatta, it is becoming aware that there is a noticing of what is arising. It's basically becoming aware that the movie you're sitting and watching on a screen is a projection that is happening on a flat, white canvas. Every emotion you have with that is created subjectively here. I can also say it with like Deadpool is not aware of Ryan Reynolds. Ryan Reynolds is aware of Deadpool. And I think that is the difference. That there is a believing in what is arising where Ryan Reynolds is not suffering as Deadpool because he knows it's just a character. There is an experiencing in this moment, but there's no suffering with the character because the character is not there. It's all made up. And this is why the difference matters. Because nihilism is philosophy. The good nihilism is philosophy. Buddhist non-duality is more practical psychology. And I think I'm going to make a second video where I talk about the different nihilistic traps that we can experience. There's more I want to say about the difference, but I think this video is long enough as it is. As a final thing, I just want to say that nihilism, the way that I see it, and I'm happy if you see it any other way, I'm happy for you to let me know in the comment section, that nihilism is the story of the separate self that is confronting a meaningless universe. It's inherently tragic, it's lonely, and it's only stable for people that are extrovert. I wouldn't know about that, but at least very low in neuroticism, very low in rumination. And there are not many of my neurodiverse brothers and sisters that click that box. Non-duality is direct recognition that there is no separate self, and therefore there is no separate from the universe. There's no separate from the meaninglessness. We're not creating a meaning into the meaninglessness. We're not creating anything positive or negative out of that because there's no I to create that. So where nihilism is left with that meaningless universe, where it doesn't matter if you get up in the morning. In non-duality, we have that free-flowing arising in this moment, with a direct experience of that arising. There is no opinions, there's no preferences, there's no judgment, there's no identification, no assumption with that arising. It's just an arising. And that just creates that non-attached adaptation, readiness to what is arising, to what is presenting itself in this moment. So if you're one of those that your deconstruction of the underlying beliefs of your religion, of who you think you were, has led you to that void that is cold and lonely and negative, where you feel isolated and hopeless, then I just want you to know you are 99% there. You're almost there. The final 1%. It isn't about you finding another answer in your mind. It's about realizing that thoughts are arising, feeling and emotions are arising. Besides that, there is an arising in this moment with no thoughts. There's just a noticing of the direct experience where that arising is happening. There's a contact with the body where the arising is experienced, and there's no opinion about that arising. It's just a pure experiencing and a joy in experiencing. I have a lot of videos where I talk about the joy of experiencing, and it is basically that in that arising, there is a joy. So really realizing that the thinker is a thought too, that there is no difference between the experiencer and the experience. It's the same thing. And anything that you think you are experiencing or feel that you are experiencing in this present moment is only what you are perceiving as reality because of unfathomable causes and conditions. And what all that means is completely unknown to us. And that's the wisdom of ignorance. I think that was it. I have another video where I want to talk more about nihilism and non-duality, and I hope to see you there. Thank you. We have created a course of our first Fetter material. This course will walk you step by step through all of the ways in which identification is created and selfing happens. If you've been struggling to see through the self-structure or have that first awakening shift, this course contains hundreds of tools to help you discover the selfing mechanisms when they're happening, and then see through the illusion of identification that are created. Along with over 14 hours of videos, this $49 course contains a full book worth of summaries, extrapolations on the videos, written inquiry suggestions, and other text. So work slowly, leave time for integration. This is powerful material and it can be life-changing.